My son shouted in my face in the middle of the dining room. "Dad, start paying or get out." And in that moment, I knew I was no longer a father in his eyes. I had built this house with my bare hands, paid for his college, covered his debts, and mortgaged my entire life just so my son could stand tall. But when I was seen as a living debt, I quietly sold the house, left in the night, and left them a lesson no one could forget. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit like and comment where you're watching from. Let me know what time it is where you are. Dad, start paying for electricity, water, or pack your bags and leave this house. Trevor yelled from across the dining table, his voice sharp as a knife, enough to make the glass of water in my hand tremble. I looked at my son, now a man in his 40s. His eyes were no longer those of the boy who used to chase me around the yard in a red baseball cap, but those of a landlord warning an uninvited tenant. I slowly set my fork down on the plate of cold spaghetti, my chest tightening, not from fear, but from something deeper. A creeping chill running down my spine when you realize you're no longer family in your own home. Melissa, his wife, sat beside him saying nothing, her face buried in her phone as if reading an important work email. No one asked if I was enjoying my meal. No one mentioned that today was Linda's death anniversary. My wife, the woman who passed away 6 years ago after a quiet battle with cancer, leaving this house as the last keeper of our memories. Trevor tapped his fingers on the table. Dad, you get a pension, don't you? I don't get why you haven't coughed up $500 for household expenses all month. Everyone has to pitch in. This is my house, not a charity. I stayed silent, because I knew if I opened my mouth then, I'd say things I couldn't take back. I looked up at the photo on the wall, a family picture from 1998. Me, Linda, Trevor with his braces and the green shirt he hated. The photo had faded, the wooden frame chipped in the left corner, just like how I felt, chipped, outdated, out of place. Trevor pushed his chair back and stood, the beer in his hand nearly spilling onto the oak table I'd built myself. I've said it, 1 week to decide. Pay up, or get out. Then he walked off, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway where he once learned to walk. I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the fluorescent light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Outside it started to rain. The smell of damp wood from the old floor filled my nose. I remembered how Linda used to nag me for not drying my feet when I came in from the rain. Her voice still echoed in my head, warm and sweet like coffee with brown sugar. But now no one made coffee for me anymore. I stood, my hand lightly touching the chair where Linda used to sit, then walked slowly to my room. On the hallway, our wedding photo swayed slightly in the draft. I closed my door slowly, without a sound. On the other side, the TV blared artificial laughter from a show Trevor liked to watch. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at a small crack in the ceiling, one I'd meant to fix for a year but never found the time. And I knew it wasn't the crack that needed fixing. It was me, my pride, crumbling bit by bit, the fragile belief that blood would never turn its back. And in that moment, I knew something in me had broken forever. But instead of getting angry or yelling like Trevor expected, I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, letting old thoughts drift back to the past, to the years when that boy was my whole world. Back then, he didn't know about smartwatches or espresso machines. My Trevor only needed a repainted bike from a junkyard, a 25-cent ice cream cone, and my hand to guide him across the street. The day he was born at St. Mary's Hospital, I stood behind the foggy glass, hands clenched, wondering, am I good enough to be a father? Linda placed the baby in my arms, smiling softly, saying, "He'll grow up like you." I hoped he'd be better than me, surpass me. Never have to struggle like I did on freezing winter construction sites, or endless night shifts from dusk to dawn. Trevor grew up in the quiet sacrifices of me and Linda. He never knew his first pair of sneakers cost his mother her dental insurance. He never asked why I disappeared every weekend. I was driving extra for a transport company to cover his private school tuition. In photos of Trevor in his graduation cap, standing by Penn State's buildings, I was there. But always behind the camera, never in the frame, because I believed my sun shining was enough. When he graduated, I thought I could finally breathe, spend time with Linda, the woman who held the family together when I was gone. We planted daisies by the porch, took short weekend trips. But then Linda found out about the cancer. Our lives turned upside down in silence. I stayed up nights reading patient care manuals, learning to give injections, change bandages, cook porridge on time. Trevor visited, but rarely. He said he was busy in Seattle, would come back before Christmas. Linda passed on a September afternoon, the sky eerily clear and calm. Trevor made it to the funeral, wore a dark suit, shed a few tears, and flew back the next day. After the funeral, the house felt as cold as an abandoned chapel. I lived alone for nearly a year. Then Trevor called, saying I shouldn't be alone, should move in with his family. Melissa and my granddaughter Emily. You'll have your own room, quiet, and my daughter will love having her grandpa around, he said over the phone. I teared up hearing that. I thought maybe he still cares after all, but I didn't know that. Even then, Trevor was already calculating. At first, living with them, I didn't notice anything off. Melissa was polite, Emily was sweet, often stopping by my room to talk about school. I thought, well, I still have a family, but then small things started popping up. The electric bill subtly left on the dining table, gentle reminders like, Dad, can you chip in for groceries? Of course I paid. I was never stingy. But then $50 turned into $200, then $500, then $800 a month. Trevor started talking about splitting costs evenly, about financial fairness in a modern family, and I started wondering, is this my son or a landlord raising the rent? Every time I opened my wallet, I remembered the times he called, asking for a temporary transfer to keep his startup afloat in 2015. Money I never saw again. I remembered sending $40,000 in 2 weeks, selling my old pickup, the last thing Linda and I used for road trips. Not a single thank you, not a hug, just a curt text. Help me out one more time, Dad. Now sitting in this cramped room, with Trevor's laughter echoing from the TV through the wall, I realize some things you give are never repaid. Not because they're bad people, but because I taught them it wasn't necessary. I taught my son that through a lifetime of quiet living and sacrifice. But yesterday when he yelled at me to pay for utilities, I also understood gratitude doesn't pass from one generation to the next if it's not nurtured. And sadly, I neglected that, too busy handling everything else for him. I couldn't sleep that night. The room was dark, so quiet I could hear the clock ticking and the wind tapping the window. I lay staring at the ceiling, the small crack by the lamp now a few inches longer than the last time I noticed. I remembered every pipe, every brick, every wire in the walls, not because I fixed them later, but because I built this house from the ground up. This house is my blood, my sweat, a part of my body in every brick. But now I live in it like a temporary guest, a stranger pushed aside by my own son. In 1993, after nearly 20 years of relentless work, Linda and I saved enough to buy this land. It was an old plot, overgrown with weeds, sold cheap because it was near an old train track. But we saw potential, a quiet neighborhood, near a school, and most importantly, big enough for a child to run around without neighbors complaining. I hired workers, then replaced them myself when money ran short. I learned to mix cement, frame wood, install plumbing from old books and coworkers' advice. The day we poured the roof, Linda brought lemonade for me and the crew. She smiled brightly, hand on her newly rounded belly. Trevor was just a tiny heartbeat inside the woman I loved most. Every evening after work, I came home, ate quickly, and kept working with a headlamp. I painted walls, laid floors, wired outlets. Linda picked the colors, light blue for the bedroom, cream for the kitchen, buttery yellow for our unborn son's room. She said, every color has to feel warm. You build the house, I'll make it a home. And we did, bit by bit, week by week, month by month, until we moved in that first winter. The house had no heater yet, but the three of us, 2 adults and a 2-month-old, slept on the living room floor, bundled in blankets, laughing with wordless pride. I remember Trevor's first steps, wobbling on a rug I cut from a clearance store. He bumped his head on the coffee table I made from leftover mahogany flooring. I panicked, but Linda laughed, rubbed his forehead, and said, it's fine, our house is built with love and love can take a few bumps. That stuck with me for decades. When Trevor was moody as a teen, when he failed, I reminded myself, these walls watched him grow. He's part of this house, and this house is part of me. Over time, I maintained the house like I cared for my own body. Every summer, I climbed the roof to replace broken tiles. Every winter, I wrapped pipes, sealed gaps, checked the heating. When Linda died, I placed her photo on the fireplace. The house grew quiet. No more laughter in the kitchen, no morning radio, no smell of Sunday baking. But I kept it up. I kept my promise. I won't let it fall apart. Because I thought, one day Trevor would understand. He'd see everything I did wasn't for credit, but to give him a safe place, a home, no conditions, no bills, no limits. But I was wrong. Things changed when I moved in with them. Trevor started renovating, swapping wooden windows for aluminum, painting the living room cold gray, replacing the fabric sofa with imported leather. I didn't object. I thought, he's young, has his own taste. But then I noticed he'd tell guests, "We bought this house in 2020. I brushed it off as a figure of speech, until I overheard Melissa whispering on the phone, "Yeah, the house is in Trevor's name. His dad's just staying with us. Staying with us." Those words stabbed my chest like a knife. I went to my room, opened the safe, and checked the old documents. The deed still listed me, Raymond Carter, since 1993, unchanged. Every mortgage payment, every property tax, paid by me for nearly 30 years. Trevor never contributed a dime to buying or maintaining this house. He only came back when his company tanked from bad investments. And I, the fool still believing in father-son love, opened the door to welcome them like prodigals returning home. Today I sit in the living room, looking out at the backyard, where I planted lavender for Linda, where Trevor's swing used to be. It's all still there, but the meaning isn't. Trevor thinks this house is his because he lives in it. But I know, and the law will confirm this house is mine. Not just because of the paperwork, but because of the sweat I left in every brick. And if anyone needs to pack their bags and leave, it sure as hell isn't me. I sit at the dining table, facing an old yellowed notebook, the only thing left with Linda's soft handwriting. She used it to track monthly expenses, menus, and special costs we set aside for Trevor. I flip through the pages, my hands trembling slightly. The ink has blurred in spots, but the words are still clear enough to read a lifetime of parenthood. August 12, 2004. Paid Trevor's final year tuition, $12,000. Ray worked overtime, took night shifts for 4 weeks straight, didn't tell Trevor, didn't want him to feel guilty. I remember Linda brewing a big pot of coffee that day, telling me to dress warmly because the nights were cold. She waited up for me until nearly 1 a.m., still smiling. We never told Trevor about those extra shifts, not to hide it, but because we believed real love doesn't need to be shown off. June 4th, 2009. Trevor lost his job after the financial crisis, needed help with credit card debt, $6,000. Ray tapped into retirement savings. Call it a late birthday gift. I still see his gaunt face when he came home. I didn't ask questions. I just withdrew the money and said, "Start over, son. We'll handle the money." Linda looked at me like she wanted to say something but stayed quiet. Some sacrifices are only understood by those who've lived them, and they understand each other with a silent glance. October 14th, 2012. Trevor and Melissa's wedding, $38,000. Ray suggested a small event, but Trevor wanted an outdoor party, live band, fancy menu. Ray agreed to work 3 extra months, pawned the Ford. I had objected. I told Linda, "We're not flush with cash. He's getting married, not us." But when Trevor hugged his mom saying, "Mom, it's once in a lifetime," I gave in. I thought if he understands one day it'll be worth it, worth the sweat, worth skipping breakfast for a month. Then the biggest one. In 2020 when Trevor knocked on my door, suit wrinkled, eyes sunken, "Dad, I need $150,000 urgently. The company, cash flow issues." I was retired. Linda was gone. I lived alone in a house too big, too quiet. And when he said, "You're my only lifeline," I opened the safe, cashed out savings bonds, sold stocks I'd held since 1998. No questions, no hesitation, because in my heart, my son's need was reason enough. Soon after, Trevor and Melissa moved in with me. "Just temporary, Dad. Once things stabilize, we'll get our own place." I believed him. I believed again. Like I believed the child I raised, nurtured, and sacrificed for would never see me as a walking ATM. But time proved that one-way gifts, given without reminders, without expecting repayment, are easily taken for granted. Trevor never mentioned that money again. Never asked, "Are you okay after draining your retirement?" Melissa never thanked us for the dream wedding they didn't pay a cent for. The house they live in, the house I built, was never called by its true owner's name. In their words, I was Dad staying with us. In reality, they were living off my labor and property. I once thought family was about giving without counting, but that not counting made them forget how much they'd received. Those old gifts now only exist in Linda's notebook, a woman gone who never let gratitude sleep. She once told me, after I bought Trevor a birthday gift, he didn't thank me for. I don't need his thanks, just for him to grow up kind. I held on to that for years, but now, yelled at by my son, seen as a burden, I dared to ask myself, did we give too much, so much he forgot what gratitude is? I closed the notebook gently, like closing an old chapter. On the cover, Linda had written in pencil, "Important things to remember." And yes, I need to remember it all, not to hold grudges, but to remind myself I was a good father. I loved unconditionally, but because of that, I now have nothing left but my pride, eroding in the house I built. The gifts I gave my son all my life turned out to be invisible investments, ones the recipient never intended to repay. And I wonder if I stop giving one day, will they still see me as family, or just an unnecessary expense in the family budget? I don't remember exactly when Emily first called me Grandpa, maybe when she started talking, or maybe when I held her after Melissa's long delivery at Central Hospital. But I vividly remember the feeling when she called Grandpa, her clear, unguarded, uncalculating voice. In a house now cold with money-driven conversations and calculations, Emily is the only light left. She's 18, with thick brown hair and deep blue eyes, like her mother's, but sometimes I catch something in Emily's gaze that's so much like Linda. Profound, gentle, honest. Emily is different from her parents. She doesn't speak in a cold tone, doesn't set conditions, doesn't half-truth. She asks if I've had breakfast. She makes tea for me on fall afternoons and always leaves a small piece of apple pie in the kitchen, though I never asked. One time I asked, "Why do you do that, Emily?" She just smiled and said, "Because you always did that for me when I was little." I nearly broke down, not out of sentiment, but because of the stark contrast between generations. Trevor, the boy I raised with everything I could give, now sees me as an old piece of furniture to be replaced. Emily, the one I only cared for in her childhood, is the only one who still remembers the little things I did. Emily and I had evenings sitting together on the porch, not needing to say much. Once she asked, "Grandpa, do you ever feel lonely?" I smiled and said, "Loneliness is a privilege of the old." But she looked at me for a long time and said, "I don't think you're old. I think you just live with people who don't want to understand you." I didn't answer, but something stung inside. I remembered Linda once saying, "People don't die from age, but from no one truly listening to them." And in this house, it seems only Emily knows how to listen. Then one May afternoon, Emily came into my room, hesitant. I was polishing an old guitar, the one I used to play for her when she was tiny. She sat beside me, silent for a moment, then whispered, "Grandpa, I think my parents are planning to sell the house." I turned to look at her. "Sell the house?" "Yeah, I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Carla on the phone. She said they're close to getting a good price. Just need to convince Dad, meaning you." She swallowed hard. "And Mom said after that you could move somewhere more suitable for older people." I wasn't shocked. Maybe because deep down I always knew it was coming, but hearing it from Emily, in the quiet of a fall-like afternoon, made it painfully clear. Trevor didn't need a thank you. He needed my signature. He no longer saw me as a father. I was just the last name on the deed, something to remove for things to go smoothly. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," Emily said softly. "I didn't know if I should tell you." I placed my hand on her small one. "Thank you for telling me. You're the only one in this house who still knows what honesty is." Emily bowed her head. After a moment, she whispered, "I don't think I'll stay here much longer either. Mom wants me to study finance, but I applied to the design program. I haven't told her. I'm scared." I gently squeezed her hand. "You don't have to be scared. Everyone has the right to pursue what makes them happy." Emily smiled, her eyes red. I looked at her, the only one in this broken family, still holding warmth, compassion, unconditional care. I thought to myself, if one day I'm no longer here, I hope Emily is the only one I leave something for. Not money, but memories, love, quiet afternoons like this. After that day, I began quietly preparing something no one knew about. I opened the safe, checked old documents, reviewed my bank account, and especially the will Linda and I had drafted but never finalized. In the back of the file cabinet, I found a folder I'd prepared for emergencies. Maybe that time had come. And if anyone deserved me to do things one last time, it definitely wasn't Trevor. It was Emily, my granddaughter, the only one who still called me grandpa with her whole heart. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sky was just brightening after a night of rain. Dewdrops clung to the kitchen window, sparkling like glass, reflecting a pale gray sky. I sat alone pouring coffee into the old ceramic mug with a lark print that Linda bought at a local fair years ago. The smell of coffee mixed with damp wood created a quiet, almost sacred atmosphere. I knew this morning everything would change. Not because I wanted it, but because they'd pushed me to my final limit. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Trevor walked into the kitchen, wearing a half-buttoned white shirt, phone in hand, looking impatient. He didn't say good morning, didn't ask if I slept well, just slammed his phone on the table like someone had annoyed him. Melissa followed, hair still wet, holding a stack of printed papers. The kitchen's air shifted instantly. I felt the tension, as if they'd just finalized a plan, and now it was time to present it to the final problem, me. Trevor pulled a chair, sat across from me. Dad, we need to talk clearly. I set my coffee down. I'm listening. He sighed, like he was about to tackle a tough equation. Melissa and I calculated the monthly expenses, with our current spending split 3 ways among adults. Each person needs to contribute about $1,200 a month. I nodded slowly. You mean, starting this month, I need to pay $1,200? Exactly, Melissa cut in. We've been carrying too much, Dad. You use electricity, water, eat meals, use internet and cable. We can't keep treating you like a guest forever. I stayed silent for a long time. Looking at them, I no longer saw family. I saw a meeting. The 2 people across from me weren't my son and daughter-in-law. They were representatives of a cold system demanding their share. Trevor leaned on the table. You have a pension. You have savings. We know that. The issue isn't that you can't pay. It's that you don't want to. So, I lifted my coffee, voice calm. What if I don't agree? Then, you should consider moving out. Trevor replied, not blinking. There are good places for older people. Medical services. People your age. You don't need to stay here if it's not comfortable. I let out a dry laugh. You mean a nursing home? Trevor shrugged. I didn't say that. But if you don't think it's fair to share costs, then maybe this isn't the right place for you anymore. I looked at Melissa. She said nothing, just stared at the papers like she was about to sign a contract. In a flash, I saw their whole plan. Pressure me to sign the house over, move out, cut the last tie of my life as a father. All right, I said, voice still gentle. Give me a week. I'll figure things out. Trevor seemed to exhale. Melissa gave a stiff smile. We knew you'd understand. I stood, poured more coffee. My hand was steady. My mind at that moment wasn't angry, but clear in a way I hadn't expected. In 1 week, I wouldn't just figure things out. I'd end this game in a way they'd never see coming. They thought I'd obediently sign the papers. They thought I'd leave with a bag and a small sum for a cheap apartment. But they forgot one thing. I laid every brick of this house. And when a builder decides to dismantle a structure, he knows exactly where to start to make it collapse quickly and cleanly. I returned to my room, opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file tied with old twine, the deed, the unnotarized will, and a business card from a lawyer I worked with after Linda's death. I held the card, its edges slightly worn, and slipped it into my wallet. 1 week. 7 days. That's all I needed to teach my son one final lesson. Not with a lecture, not with a slap, but with the only language he still understood. Ownership and control. I sat at the table, opened Linda's notebook. On the last page, she'd written, if one day Trevor forgets how to be human, remind him with the truth. I ran my finger over the words, then nodded slightly. It's time, Linda. Rest easy. That afternoon, after Trevor and Melissa left to meet a financial advisor, likely to discuss transferring the deed. I sat in the kitchen a while, sipping cold coffee. The late-day sunlight hit the table, casting long streaks like it split the kitchen into two worlds, one of gratitude, one of calculation. I knew I no longer belonged to their side, and to leave that world I needed to act quietly, but decisively. I went to my bedroom, closed the door softly, pulled a small locked wooden box from the dresser drawer. Inside were the house deed, land survey, tax records from 10 years back, and a business card I'd kept for 6 years. Donna Herrera, senior real estate agent, Keller and Associates. Linda knew Donna from church volunteering. I remembered Linda saying, "If anything happens with the house, I trust Donna. She's good people." I picked up the landline, dialed the number on the card. The line rang 3 times before a woman's voice came through, as clear and sharp as ever. "Hello, this is Donna Herrera." "Donna, it's me, Raymond Carter." A brief pause. Then she replied, voice softening, "Raymond, my goodness, it's been ages. I'm so sorry about Linda. She was a wonderful woman." "Thank you. I'm not calling just to catch up. I need your help to sell the house." "The house on Ridgefield? Raymond, are you sure? You and Linda built that place with your own hands." "I'm sure," I said, voice oddly calm, "and I need it done discreetly. No public listing, no sign, no social media ads. You get me?" Donna paused. "I get it. You have a reason?" "Family," I said. "But not the kind you're thinking." I heard her tap the desk lightly. "All right, I have a few clients looking for homes in your area. They're ready to buy fast, pay cash, as long as the paperwork's clean. I just need one meeting to photograph the interior and assess market value. Are you free tomorrow? I've got 2 hours in the morning, 9 to 11. Trevor will be back after that." "Good. I'll be there at 9 sharp. And Raymond, thanks for trusting me. I don't have anyone else to trust." The next morning, at exactly 9, Donna pulled up in a silver SUV. I opened the side door to avoid nosy neighbors. Donna was professional, no prying questions. She moved through the house like a shadow, snapping photos, measuring rooms, noting details. When she reached the living room, where Linda's memorial photo hung, she paused, lightly touching the frame. "She'd probably agree with this decision," Donna whispered. "I hope so." We sat at the dining table, where Trevor had pounded his fist and yelled at me the night before. Donna opened her briefcase, pulled out a pricing sheet, with the location, lot size, and recent renovations. "I estimate a quick sale could fetch about $880,000. If you don't need top dollar, I have buyers ready to put down a deposit in 2 days." I nodded. "I don't want to wait. I want to sell quietly, leave quietly." "Where will you go after?" "I've looked at small apartments in the next town. I have enough to buy outright, no loans. I just need a clean break." Donna didn't ask more. She handed me the sale documents, explained each section. I signed everything in under 10 minutes. The pen glided like silk, blue ink, bold on every page. Like closing a chapter of my life no one in the house knew about. Before leaving, Donna stood at the threshold, looking around one last time. "Raymond, I know no one wants to sell memories, but sometimes selling isn't giving up. It's taking yourself back." I said nothing, just watched her car disappear behind the trees. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, where I used to read the paper when Linda was alive. Trevor came home later than usual. He walked into the kitchen, noticed nothing different, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and plopped into a chair like he owned the place. But he didn't know that, in a few days, the house he thought was his would belong to someone else. It would be theirs, and I had already begun my silent departure, and I never looked back. 3 days later, at exactly 10 a.m., I stood at a notary's desk in a small office in the next town. Donna had prepared everything flawlessly. The buyers, a middle-aged couple from Harrisburg, didn't show, having signed through their lawyer. No handshake, no small talk. Everything was quiet, simple, exactly as I wanted. The notary, a woman in her 30s with a gentle, professional voice, read each clause to confirm I understood my rights and obligations. I nodded at every point. When she handed me the final contract, I held the pen, glancing at the title, Deed Transfer Confirmation. Below was my name, Raymond H. Carter, in bold and a blank line for my signature. I paused for a few seconds. Not from hesitation, but because I remembered Linda, the way she signed our first loan to fix the roof, her hand trembling but eyes resolute, the way she signed her discharge papers after chemo, forcing a smile despite pale lips. If she were here today, I know she'd understand. She'd stand behind me, hand on my shoulder, supporting me without words. I signed. The blue ink flowed smoothly on the white paper, decisive, clean, like a final slash across everything tied to that house. The notary stamped the papers, handed me a copy, and smiled professionally. Congratulations, it's done. The funds will transfer to your account within 24 hours. I shook her hand, thanked her, and left the office with a composure I didn't know I still had. Back straight, steps slow, calm, as if I'd walked through a storm without a scratch on my coat. I drove back to the house as usual. The house looked the same. Trevor working upstairs, Melissa arranging flowers in the living room, Emily at school. No one knew they were no longer the future owners of anything here. I walked down the hallway, past the 1977 wedding photo of Linda and me by our old pickup, our young smiles untouched by disappointment. I touched the glass lightly. We did it, Linda. We didn't let them steal our legacy. That evening, we ate dinner together. Trevor talked about the stock market. Melissa mentioned Emily getting a scholarship offer if she majored in finance. I listened, nodded, but in my head I was counting down 72 hours until the buyer's full payment, $880,000, hit my account. After that, I'd have 1 week to leave, per the delayed handover agreement I'd cleverly arranged with Donna, a detail Trevor would never suspect. When dinner ended, I cleared the table as usual. Melissa didn't stop me or help. Trevor called from the living room. Next week you might need to sign some papers. My lawyer's preparing the deed transfer. I'll send you a draft to review. I turned, smiling faintly. Sure, send it over. That night I lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling. For the first time in months I slept without pills. No nightmares. No cold sweats. Just absolute stillness. As if my mind had finally let go of a burden that was never mine to carry. The next morning, I woke to a bank notification. Your account has received $880,000 from Keller and Associates Escrow. I didn't smile or sigh. I just stood by the window watching the morning sun hit the neighbor's roof. The sky was strikingly blue. Unusually so. Minutes later, I opened the safe one last time. Took out 2 envelopes. One for the lawyer, one for Emily. I placed them carefully in my suitcase, along with personal documents, a few old photos, and a faded family album. This house would soon no longer be mine. But I'd leave on my terms with the truth and my pride reclaimed. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I'd be gone. Silently, without warning, and leave behind a storm I didn't need to shout about for them to know it had passed through. I started packing at noon, when Trevor left to meet his lawyer and Melissa took Emily to a bookstore downtown. They suspected nothing. I moved like a shadow, quiet, tidy, leaving no trace. No large suitcase, no bulky boxes. I took only what I truly needed. A few clothes, the family album, a couple of Linda's photos, personal documents, the watch she gave me, and the letter I wrote for Emily. I left the rest behind. The wooden bookshelf I built by hand still stands in the living room corner. The old sofa, Linda's table lamp, the wedding photo frame, the tangible memories, I didn't take them. Because I don't need to own anything to know I once belonged there. My love, effort, and memories remain in every grain of wood, every brick of that house. But I no longer need that house to remember Linda or the past. I need a future. At 9 p.m., a light rain fell. It was gentle like thin mist, enough to cool the air and make the street glisten under the streetlights. I put on a thick coat, a hat, and pulled my suitcase to the car. Everything was packed in the trunk since the afternoon. The new apartment is nearly 50 miles away, in a quiet community for independent retirees. Not a nursing home, but a small haven just right for an old man still sharp, still wanting to live life on his own terms. Before leaving, I returned to the kitchen. The light was still on, casting a warm glow over the dining table. I placed a sealed envelope there addressed to Trevor and Melissa. Read this when you wake up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. The real goodbye happened the day Trevor pointed at my face and shouted, "Pay up or get out." From that moment, I was no longer part of the family picture they were half painting. I was just a shadow they wanted to erase for a clean, controllable backdrop. I got in the car, drove slowly out of the neighborhood, low beams off, no music, no sound. Just the patter of rain on the windshield and fragments of memories flashing through my mind like an old film. Linda and me in front of the house on our first Christmas. Trevor riding a bike without training wheels for the first time. Emily dozing on my shoulder at 3 years old. All gentle pieces, I'll carry them with me, but I won't let them pull me back. I arrived at the new apartment near midnight. The manager had left the key as arranged with Donna. The place is small but cozy, with a kitchen, a small balcony overlooking maple trees. I opened the door, turned on the light. Nothing grand, nothing lavish, but everything peaceful. And for the first time in years, I had a place I chose. No one interfering, no one judging, no need to trade my pride. I made a cup of tea, sat in a wooden chair by the window and quietly watched the rain slide down the glass. In my coat pocket was the second letter, written for Emily, sealed, left in her desk drawer. In it, I didn't mention Trevor or Melissa. I only wrote about the first day she learned to draw, how she secretly showed me her sketch assignments her mother forbade. I wrote about when she cried over a C in math, and how I told her, "You weren't born to be good at everything. You were born to be true to yourself." I also left in the safe a final envelope, legal papers transferring part of the house sale money to a scholarship fund named after Linda Carter, for Emily, if she pursues art or design. No conditions. No one's approval needed. No one knows, except Emily. When the clock struck 1 a.m., I turned off the light, got into bed, and pulled the blanket to my chest. The rain had stopped. The room was strangely still. I looked at the new ceiling. No cracks. No old memories. No long nights suffocated by the invisible feeling of being a stranger in my own life. Here, I am the master. No one can evict me from the peace I've reclaimed. Tonight, I moved away. No one held me back. No one saw me off. But I know, in another room, there's a young girl, the only one who still calls me grandpa with all her love, who will one day understand why I left like this. And when that happens, she might be the only one in that old house who feels regret for someone like me no longer being there. The next morning, I sat in my new apartment, holding a steaming cup of black coffee, watching sunlight pour through the sliding window. The room was utterly silent, not the silence of coldness, but a kind silence, like the gentle embrace of chosen solitude. No rushed footsteps, no TV blaring from the living room, no knock at dinner time to remind me, time to pay the electric bill, Dad. That absence was the first proof of freedom, and in that freedom, I began writing the final letter to Trevor, not to explain, not to justify, but to say everything I'd once swallowed back. Trevor, I don't know how you'll feel reading this. Maybe angry, maybe shocked, maybe relieved. If you think the burden called Dad is finally gone from your life. But whatever you feel, I want you to understand one thing. I didn't abandon you. I chose to leave. When you shouted that I had to start paying or get out, I wasn't hurt because you demanded money. I've paid all my life. I paid your tuition, took out loans, sold the pickup, pawned stocks, skipped vacations so you could study, marry, start a business, and live the life you chose. I paid with every dollar, every minute of sleep, every dream your mother Linda and I let slip. And no, I don't regret those things. But what hurt was that you thought everything I did was worth nothing. That my presence only mattered if it came with a bill. That I, who held you through a fever at 5, carried you through a blizzard to the hospital, stayed up nights reading loan documents to fund your startup, am now just a freeloader living off you. Trevor, you don't understand that house. It's not just an asset to profit from. It's blood, memories, 40 years of sweat, every brick I laid with my hands, every scratch on the floor from when you ran around as a kid. Your mother picked the wall colors, the curtains, the sofa's spot. When you and Melissa moved in, I imagined a reunion. But in reality, it was a silent deal, a place to stay in exchange for being controlled. You were once a good boy, but somewhere along the way you lost gratitude, and no one taught you to pick it back up. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I was too quiet. Maybe I let you think everything I gave was a given. But that silence killed the last bond between father and son. Today I no longer live in that house. I sold it. No, not for the money. I have enough to live my final years in peace. I sold it to reclaim what you stole without knowing. My dignity. I know you'll be angry. You'll say I betrayed the family. But I ask you, what family? A family that demands emotional invoices? A family where a father is told to find somewhere else to live because he's no longer worthy? If that's family, I give myself the right to walk away. I don't hate you. I'm just sad and disappointed and tired. I loved you more than myself. But love without respect in return is just chains. I'm breaking them today, not to escape, but to live. I left part of the house sale money for Emily. She's the only one in that house who looks at me without judgment. The only one who asks if I've eaten. The only one who remembers her grandpa made toast with honey every Sunday morning. Don't be mad at her. She didn't choose sides. She chose kindness. If one day you look back and feel empty, know that emptiness isn't because I left. It's because you never truly held on to what matters most. Family, goodbye, Dad. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, wrote Trevor's name clearly, and mailed it to the old address. No money enclosed, no assets. Just a few sheets of paper, heavier than any gift I'd ever given. That evening, I walked under the maple trees near the apartment complex, their leaves starting to turn golden. The air was chilly, but I didn't shiver. For the first time in ages, I felt truly light. Light enough that if Linda were alive, she'd put her hand on my chest and say, "Raymond, you're finally breathing right." That morning, around 7 a.m., Trevor woke up in a foul mood. The night before, he'd dreamed of being trapped in a collapsing house, calling out with no answer. Tuan, Melissa was already up, checking work emails on her laptop. Emily was still asleep. Trevor went to the kitchen to make coffee and saw the envelope neatly placed on the dining table, where I used to sit every morning. Simple handwriting. To Trevor and Melissa, read carefully. No logo, no decoration, no sense of urgency. But something about the calm script sent a chill down Trevor's spine. He tore the edge, pulled out the paper. When he read, "I sold the house 3 days ago and moved out yesterday," his eyes darkened. "What is this?" he blurted, voice hoarse. Melissa stepped out from the living room, phone in hand, eyes still on the screen. "What are you talking about?" Trevor threw the letter on the table. "Dad, he sold the house. Actually sold it. And he's gone." Melissa frowned, picked up the paper, and read it through. The more she read, the more her hands shook. She looked at her husband. "He's not joking. He signed the sale contract. Even the transfer timeline is done. We're not in ownership anymore." Trevor nearly lost his balance. He sank into a chair, hands clutching his head. "No way. This house is ours. I was just talking to the lawyer last week. I was going to transfer it to my name." Melissa's brow furrowed. "Right. But if he was the original owner, we had no claim. We were just living here." Silence. A stark truth hit them. The house where they lived, planned to sell, planned to pressure me to sign over, was never theirs. And now it belonged to no one in their family. Trevor bolted up, ran to my room, pushed the door open. Empty. Bed neatly made. Closet cracked open. Nothing inside but a few bare hangers. Safe open. Empty. On the desk, one old photo of me and Linda remained, placed deliberately, like a silent goodbye. He staggered back to the living room. Emily had woken, hearing the shouting. She blinked, confused, coming down the stairs, asking, "What's going on?" Trevor didn't answer. Melissa turned to her daughter, voice sharp. "Your grandpa left, without a word. Sold the house. Everything." Emily froze mid-stare. "Left. Yeah. And left us with nothing." Trevor roared. "Didn't even tell his own son." Emily stepped down, glanced at the letter on the table. When she saw the final line, "I left a separate letter for Emily," in her desk drawer. "Read it when no adults are around." Her heart raced. She said nothing, turned and went straight to her room. In her bedroom, Emily opened her desk. Sure enough, a thin yellow envelope, handwritten. "Emily, keep this to yourself." She sat, trembling, and opened it. My familiar handwriting spoke to her directly. "Dear Emily, I'm sorry for leaving without one last hug, but I knew if you saw my suitcase, you'd try to stop me, and I couldn't be stopped again. I stayed too long, hoped too much, endured too much. You're the last light in that house. You made me feel human, needed, seen with loving eyes. So I left you a small gift, not cash, Not the house, but an opportunity. In the safe, I left a certificate transferring a scholarship fund in your name, worth $120,000. Enough for you to study whatever you truly want. No conditions. No one's permission needed. If you want to pursue art, design, or even travel the world to find yourself, do it. Because no one has the right to make you live a life that's not yours. Don't be sad that I left. Be glad you saw me come alive again. One last time. Love, Grandpa. Emily cried. Not loudly, not audibly, just tears falling one by one onto the paper, smudging the ink. She folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her personal folder, and closed the desk. Downstairs, Trevor was still yelling into the phone, calling lawyers and financial advisors. Melissa sat stunned on the couch, eyes vacant like someone who'd lost a treasure. But Emily, the only one her grandpa left something for, just quietly looked out the window. She knew, from this moment, nothing would be the same. He was gone, but he left freedom and choice, something her parents never understood, but the only thing her grandpa fully grasped. 3 days after Trevor learned the house was sold, his rage still hadn't cooled. The house was steeped in tension and chaos. Trevor frantically called everyone: real estate lawyers, financial advisors, bank staff. He tried to find any legal loophole in the transfer, hoping for a mistake to reverse it all. But there was nothing. Every document was valid, notarized, lawful. Raymond Carter, the sole owner, sold the house with full authority. The transfer was clean, indisputable. Melissa went from silence to anger to panic. She started blaming Trevor. You were stupid not to make him sign a power of attorney last year. You trusted he was old, weak, wouldn't do anything. Now we've lost everything. Trevor shot back. You told me to go slow, not push too hard. You said wait for the right moment to take the house, for him to sign willingly. Now look, not only lost the house, but are faced with friends, colleagues. Their marriage began to crack in ways they hadn't foreseen. Not from lack of money, but from the feeling of being robbed of what they assumed was theirs. Trevor's ego was deeply wounded. He couldn't stand that an old man, someone he saw as weak, outmaneuvered him. No warning, no permission. No chance for a counterstrike. On the 5th day after the shock, the bank sent a notice about an old mortgage Trevor had taken for his company 2 years ago. The house was in Raymond's name, so Trevor used it as collateral for a $120,000 loan. Now, with ownership transferred, the bank demanded full repayment within 30 days or face a lawsuit. Melissa paled. Trevor nearly smashed the dining table. The cost of greed began to take shape, not in blood, but in the crushing numbers on bank statements. Emily was different. Since receiving her grandpa's letter, she'd nearly cut herself off from her parents. She didn't mention the scholarship to Trevor or Melissa, but she began preparing to switch majors. She researched art programs in New York, emailed academic advisors, quietly redrew designs her mother once tore up and threw away. She felt guilty for not stopping her grandpa's departure, but she also knew he was right. Right to protect the last untainted part of the family from pragmatism. If she let her current life erode her ideals like her parents did, her grandpa's sacrifice would be meaningless. A week later, Trevor's lawyer emailed, requesting a meeting with Raymond. Trevor wanted to talk man-to-man with my dad. I refused, not out of fear, but because I had nothing left to say. The real final conversation happened in the letter. Trevor read, or didn't finish. Either way, I knew. Silence was the only response for those who only hear words when they come with benefits. Trevor, unwilling to be sidelined, went to my new apartment. He stood at the door, pounding hard, but no one answered. I was away in Vermont for a few days, my first vacation since Linda's death. The complex manager was instructed not to share information with strangers. Trevor stood in the rain, trembling, not from cold, but from realizing, for the first time, that some things he couldn't control, including his own father. That night, while Trevor downed a glass of whiskey alone in the living room, Melissa quietly called her mother, asking for a loan. Emily locked her door, played jazz, and began drawing a sunlit balcony, just like the one I described in my letter. She knew the storm in that house had passed, but the wreckage it left would take far longer to clear. That weekend, a legal letter from the buyers arrived. Trevor and Melissa had 14 days to vacate the property, as the delayed handover agreement had expired. No negotiation, no extension, no sentiment, Trevor held the letter, standing still in the empty kitchen where his father once made morning coffee. For the first time, he felt fear, not for losing the house, but because he knew what left wasn't just an old man. It was the only conscience that ever existed in that house. That was the cost of greed, lost money, lost reputation, lost respect from family. But the most painful, losing someone who, when he realized he needed them, was no longer there. 6 weeks after leaving the old house, I woke to an autumn morning in my small apartment. Soft sunlight filtered through thin curtains, spilling onto the light wood floor. The tidy kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee, greeted the day gently. No one rushed me to pay. No one glared when I lingered in my chair. No bills left on the dining table. Just me, at peace, with time all my own. I stepped onto the balcony. Before me, maple trees were turning gold and red. Squirrels darted along branches for acorns. Birds chirped in the distance. Beyond was a trail through a small forest, where I walked every afternoon. Here, no one knew me as the old man kicked out by his son. They just knew me as Mr. Carter, a polite older man who gardens, reads, and always carries a calm smile. I spent most days rereading Linda's old books, tending to lavender pots she loved, and writing my life's journal. Not for publishing, but to remember I lived, loved, sacrificed, and finally stood up for myself. I also got regular letters from Emily, handwritten, sent by mail, old-fashioned. She wrote about her first design class, sketches praised by professors, mornings sipping coffee and thinking of her grandpa. Each line from Emily confirmed my decision to leave was right. Not to cut ties, but to grant freedom to myself and the only grandchild who kept a whole heart in that old house. I haven't aged more since leaving. Strange. Before, I felt worn, weak, invisible. Now I'm not stronger or younger, but I feel light, clear, and alive. Some nights I miss Linda, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, our first Christmas with Trevor's handmade tree ornaments. But the longing no longer carries regret. It's just part of me, like an old song playing in the afternoon, sad, but not painful. One afternoon, Emily called, her voice brimming with excitement. "Grandpa, I'm having a student art exhibition soon. I painted a small apartment, a sunny balcony, a man reading with a cat on his lap. I titled it, Freedom in a Small House." I laughed. "A cat, too," she replied. "Yeah, you need a friend." That night I sat and wrote one line in my journal. You don't need to win an argument to be right. Sometimes leaving, with silence and pride intact, is the greatest victory. And in this small apartment, with lavender pots on the porch, a handmade wooden table, and sunlight spreading like a warm blanket, I found something I rarely touched in my life. Freedom. No one gave it. No one can take it. Only I could claim it. The story above is not just a personal tragedy of a father disrespected by his own son, but also reflects a painful issue in many American families today: the generational gap, the decline of gratitude, and the consequences of pragmatic thinking in family relationships. In a modern society where material value is increasingly prioritized, many, especially the younger generation, have unintentionally forgotten the intangible but priceless contributions of parents and grandparents. Trevor isn't a villain, but he represents a type of person who equates family with financial obligation, seeing his father as a free tenant rather than the one who built that home from its first bricks. Meanwhile, Raymond Carter, like many American fathers, sacrificed his life raising his son, supporting him through financial crises, funding his wedding, even selling retirement stocks to save Trevor's company. Being told to pay up or move out by his son was the final straw, and a deserved counterstrike when he quietly sold the house to reclaim his dignity. The lesson from this story is kindness shouldn't be mistaken for endless obligation, and parental silence isn't unconditional acceptance. Every child should learn to be grateful rather than assume, to listen more than command. And for parents, it's time to teach that love doesn't mean allowing exploitation. Sometimes, the greatest love is knowing when to walk away. If you believe gratitude and respect in family should never be lost, please subscribe to share meaningful stories like this. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video with another emotional journey, where every choice carries its own price.